Picture this. You're standing at the absolute bottom of a 400-meter vertical cliff. You look up, and at the very peak, literally piercing the clouds, there's a building. A whole building just sitting on a stone pillar with no roads, no stairs, and absolutely no way up. And people live there. The first question isn't why, it's how. How in the world did they drag stone all the way up there? So in this explainer, we're diving deep into 5 incredible structures around the world that answer a pretty simple question. What do humans do when they are cornered with absolutely nowhere left to run? Well, they climb where no one can follow. 400 meters. I mean, that's literally the height of a modern skyscraper, right? But instead of steel and glass, it's sheer, unyielding rock. It just shows you how totally absurd these constructions are. Who looks at a sheer rock face and thinks, yes, this is a perfect place to build a home? Desperate people, that's who. When human beings are pushed to the absolute edge, our ingenuity just defies gravity itself. Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a global roadmap today covering 5 totally impossible case studies. First, monks in the sky. Second, the cave castle betrayal. Third, Rome's impossible siege ramp. Fourth, the unconquerable basalt fangs. Fifth, the Paranoiacs Palace. And finally, we'll wrap up with the ultimate fortress paradox. Let's get right to it. Number 1, monks in the sky, over in Meteora, Greece. So rising out of the plains, there are these massive 60-million-year-old sandstone pillars. Back in 1344, a monk named Athanasius was looking for extreme isolation from the Ottoman Empire, so he actually scaled one of these things and founded the first of 24 monasteries. And honestly, the daily reality here was terrifying. There were no pulleys, no winches, no cranes, nothing like that. Just ropes, baskets, and literal blind faith. To get up, you basically sat in a net while the monks hauled you hundreds of meters straight into the sky. And when terrified travelers would ask the monks, hey, how often do you replace these frayed ropes? Their answer was just chilling. They'd say, when God decides that it is time for the ropes to break. Talk about a literal leap of faith every single time. Think about the absolutely wild timeline required for this kind of isolation. Take the Varlam Monastery in 1517. 2 brothers spent 22 years hauling every single stone, every plank, every tool up that sheer cliff face using nothing but baskets. 22 years. Just backbreaking, totally lethal labor. But get this, once everything was actually at the top, the real construction took just 20 days. Just 20 days. It perfectly captures the sheer, ridiculous willpower it took just to exist in a place like this. All right, moving on to number 2, the cave castle betrayal in Perched, Slovenia. So originally built way back in the 12th century, this fortress doesn't just sit on a hill. No, it hangs 123 meters up directly inside the gaping mouth of a cave. Fast forward to the 15th century, and it becomes the ultimate hideout for this rebel knight named Erasmus Luger. Now, the emperor's army besieged him for over a year, and they were just utterly confused as to why the guy wasn't starving. Well, instead of starving, Erasmus was actually relentlessly taunting them. He had this whole bag of tricks, a secret 20-meter tunnel carved straight through the solid rock of the cave that led out to a dense forest. So while the army is freezing to death outside, Erasmus is enjoying an endless supply of fresh food and wine. I mean, he literally threw fresh cherries and roasted ox down at the besieging army just to prove he wasn't suffering at all. How crazy is that? But, his ending wasn't exactly heroic. In fact, you could definitely argue it's the most unheroic death in all of medieval history. Since the emperor's men couldn't breach the stone, they resorted to bribing a servant. And this servant's job? To place a lit candle in the window of the castle's most vulnerable, thinly walled room, which happened to be the outhouse, right exactly when Erasmus was using it. The besiegers saw the candle, fired a single cannonball, and bam! The great rebel knight met his end right there on the toilet. A literal fatal flaw. Number 3. Rome's impossible siege ramp at Masada in the Judean desert. This brings us to the scorching Judean desert, to a massive 440-meter-high mesa. It was originally fortified as a paranoid bunker by Herod the Great, but in 73 AD, it became the site of an epic standoff between 960 Jewish rebels and the brutal 10th Roman Legion. And this brilliantly illustrates the downright terrifying scale of Roman engineering. You've got 960 rebels trapped up top, backed by massive cisterns holding 40,000 cubic meters of precious water. Down below, a relentless Roman legion building a 4-kilometer siege wall, so literally no one escapes. And, well, because the Romans couldn't just march up a vertical cliff, they did the unthinkable. Using thousands of Jewish prisoners of war to stop the rebels from firing down on them, Rome basically built a literal mountain. A 75-meter earth ramp climbing up at a steep 20-degree incline. So, when the Romans finally pushed their heavy siege engines up that impossible ramp and breached the wall, they were completely expecting a fierce, bloody battle. But instead, they found only silence. Knowing the horrific fate of slavery and torture that was waiting for them, the rebels made a heartbreaking choice. The men methodically and just tragically took the lives of their own families. Then they drew lots, choosing 10 men to kill the rest. Finally, one man killed those 9, set the whole palace ablaze, and took his own life. The Romans conquered the rock, sure, but they didn't conquer the people. All right, on to number 4. The unconquerable basalt fangs at Trotsky Castle in Czechia. About 100 kilometers northeast of Prague, there sits this truly bizarre 14th century architectural marvel. Imagine 2 massive basalt teeth. They're actually the jagged remnants of 2 ancient volcanic plugs. The taller, sharper peak is known as Pana, or the Maiden, and the shorter, wider peak is Baba, the Crone. The builders basically just slapped thick walls between these 2 impossibly hard volcanic rocks and carved deep rainwater cisterns right into the stone, which actually perfectly mimics the ancient survival designs we just talked about at Masada. Now, basalt is practically indestructible. Back in the 15th century, Jan Žižeka, who was this brilliant and amazingly entirely blind general steamrolling across Europe, he rolled up to Trotsky with his cannons. He assessed the fortress, quickly realized his cannonballs were literally just bouncing off the volcanic rock, and declared, "This castle is strong as a bone." And he just packed up and completely abandoned the siege. But you know what's crazy? Decades later, this unconquerable fortress actually fell, not to cannons, but to a band of marauders who simply knocked on the front gate disguised as innocent merchants. Which brings us to number 5, the Paranoiacs Palace in Sigiriya, Sri Lanka. Picture this, a 180-meter tall magma core just rising straight out of the jungle. Back in the 5th century, King Kassapa brutally murdered his father and then fled right up this rock to build the ultimate Paranoiacs Palace. He wanted to be completely 100% untouchable. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer luxurious madness of it all. Kassapa didn't just build a fort, the guy built an ancient penthouse. He installed complex water gardens down at the base with working hydraulic fountains, and he used fluid engineering so advanced that some of them still work today when it rains. No joke. Halfway up, he had 500 stunning frescoes painted on the sheer rock face, 100 meters in the air. And to even start the final ascent, you had to walk between the massive brick paws of a giant sculpted lion. Talk about a masterpiece of intimidation. So how exactly do you defeat a guy living up in the clouds behind giant stone lions? Well, you just wait for him to make a mistake. After 18 long years, his brother's army finally showed up. But instead of just staying safely in his impregnable fortress, the arrogant Kasyapa actually marched all the way down to fight in the open field. And during the battle, his war elephant unexpectedly detoured to avoid a swamp. His army, seeing this and thinking he was retreating, completely broke rank and fled. Left utterly alone, Kasyapa drew his dagger and took his own life. The fortress itself was perfect. The human commanding it, not so much. And finally, number 6, the ultimate fortress paradox. So looking across all 5 of these extraordinary locations, we start to see this fascinating pattern emerge. It's a central thesis about the clash between unyielding stone and, well, fragile human nature. So the crucial point is this, ultimate fortress paradox. On one hand, we have solid rock, 400-meter cliffs, impossibly hard basalt, and heights that just totally defy logic. But on the other hand, we have human nature, a treacherous candle in a bathroom window, marauders faking their identity, and prisoners of war forced to literally build their captors' ramps. The walls of Masada, Prajama, and Trotsky. They didn't fail mechanically. They never actually crumbled. They were bypassed by human betrayal, trickery, and despair. It really leaves us marveling at both the absolute genius and the deep vulnerability of the human spirit. Because when we're cornered, we can build the impossible, right? We can turn volcanic fangs and cave mouths into sanctuaries. But the stone is only ever as strong as the people hiding behind it. So I want to leave you with this question. What is truly harder to break, solid rock or human resolve? Think about that for a second. Let me know down in the comments which of these impossible fortresses is your absolute favorite. And until next time, keep exploring the incredible depths of